Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Malcolm Wolf, President and CEO of the National Hydropower Association, and I'd like to welcome you to the latest installment of our Path to Clean Energy virtual series. I'm thrilled to be partnered today with Elisa Oberman, the Executive Director of Marine Renewables Canada, in celebration of World Oceans Day. In case you did not know, marine energy encompasses a wide array of water power technologies that includes wave, tidal, ocean current, ocean thermal, and riverine technologies. As an industry on the cusp of full-scale commercialization, it has an amazing potential to power millions of homes throughout North America and be the missing link for our clean energy goals.
Thanks very much, Malcolm. Very excited to be here with you today. So, as we know, both in the US and Canada, marine energy is in many ways similar to where the solar industry was just a decade ago, very much poised to make a significant impact in decarbonizing our electricity grid. And we're going to hear today from some industry experts on how marine energy is accelerating commercialization and deploying devices. So this virtual event is going to feature some special interviews with US Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici and Minister of Natural Resources and Renewables for Nova Scotia, the Honourable Tory Rushton. The interviews are then going to be followed by two panel discussions by some mutual members. And so with that, let's hear from Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici.
Congresswoman Bonamici, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for being such a great champion for marine energy. You were also our Legislator of the Year for the National Hydropower Association back in 2021, so we really appreciate your tireless commitment to water power and marine energy in particular. In honor of World Oceans Day, I wanted to kick it off by asking you about your efforts to both protect and utilize the oceans to solve the climate crisis, and how that intersects with your support for marine energy.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Malcolm, and the association. It's great to be with you, albeit virtually. Well, as a co-chair of both the House Oceans Caucus and the Congressional Estuary Caucus, and someone who represents a coastal district, this is really critical, and also serve on the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. So there are a lot of connections between marine energy and efforts to preserve the ocean and address the climate crisis. One, for example, is my Blue Carbon for Our Planet Act. When we restore our coastlines and the plants and seagrasses and mangroves, they act as a carbon sink, and that leads to healthier oceans. That idea came around from a visit I had to the Hatfield Marine Science Center years ago. So the Blue Carbon Act is part of using our natural solutions to address the climate crisis. But we know we need to transition to clean energy, and marine energy is very promising. As you know, the Water Power Research and Development Act of 2020 increased federal funding for these projects, but we know we need to continue building on it. So I'm leading the letter for the fiscal year 23 funding for the Water Power Technologies Office, calling for more funding for marine energy activities. And here in Oregon, of course, we have the leadership of Oregon State University and the Pacific Marine Energy Center and pioneering businesses like Vigor that are committed. So I'm excited. Marine energy is a very promising but largely untapped clean energy solution.
We agree 1,000%, and we're especially grateful of your leadership in authoring that Water Power Research and Development Act of 2020. It really did create kind of that organic statute we needed for sustainable funding for marine energy technologies. Building on that, NHA's Marine Energy Council released a commercialization strategy last year, and we call on domestic technology deployment targets, starting small of let's get 50 megawatts in the water in 2025, but growing to 500 by 2030 and hopefully a gigawatt by 2035. From your perspective, how do we achieve kind of solar level scale investment in marine energy R&D so that we can really grow and take advantage of this amazing resource?
Right. Well, and that's a great question, Malcolm. And, unlike the solar and wind and storage, marine energy has not been commercially deployed. And so that's one of the things that we're working on and changing that trajectory. Research and testing efforts that are currently underway here at the Pacific Marine Energy Center have really helped, I think, strengthen industry technologies. Again, OSU, Oregon State University, received the first ever permit to host the commercial scale grid connected test facility on the coast. And then in February, Department of Energy awarded $25 million to the 8 groups for testing wave energies. So I think what we need to look at is appropriations as a key. So your advocacy is making a difference, but also the effort to educate lawmakers about the potential is really critical to winning support. And also from my position on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, we know that research and development is critical as well. So I regularly highlight the potential of green energy on the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, and will continue to do so to call attention. But also I have to note that reaching commercialization is really challenging, and that's why I'm working on my Regional Clean Energy Innovation Act to create a network of regional institutes that will convene like-minded stakeholders and leverage those regional markets to help clean energy technologies overcome that commercialization valley of death. So putting all those pieces together, along with the legislation that protects the ocean and acts as a carbon sink, we're going to make some progress.
I share your optimism, and I know I'm somewhat frustrated. While I'm a huge supporter of wind and solar and battery technologies, we're not going to be able to have a 100% reliable grid just relying on those technologies. Right. And not all communities. I'm amazed, particularly with marine energy technologies. I visited some amazing facilities in Alaska and other places where they're not connected to a grid, and the only reliable source they can have is taking advantage of these kind of innovative marine energy technologies.
Exactly. And we can learn from other countries. I mean, there are other countries, particularly some European countries, we can learn from them about the tremendous potential, and especially in the areas that won't be as well served by wind or solar.
I wonder if you could offer us some advice. When you talk about marine energy, most folks think about wind and solar and batteries, electric vehicles. That's the shiny objects.
Right.
What's your reaction when you talk about marine energy with your colleagues on Capitol Hill? I know I usually get kind of glazed eyes. People don't even realize it's a viable option.
Right. Well, I think most people say, do you mean offshore wind? And then I explain, well, there's also marine energy using the power of the waves and tides and currents, and they kind of perk up, and there definitely is an interest. One of the things that I want to emphasize too, Malcolm, is making sure that when we're working on these issues, we have all the stakeholders around the table. It really does make a difference, and that's true with offshore wind as well as marine energy. Making sure that we're collaborating with everyone whose livelihood depends on the coast, and that collaboration is going to help us move forward. The recognition is there that we do need to transition to clean energy. And out here where we had a oppressive heat dome last summer, the temperatures got up to like 117 degrees, and with the risks of sea level rise and coastal acidification, people understand, people in coastal communities understand that we need to transition, and having all the voices around the table will help. But there's, again, tremendous potential, and thank you to the association for all that you are doing. One of the things I'd like to do as well is to make sure that we're talking with our landlocked colleagues as well, who, and this is true with ocean issues, making sure that people in central part of the country understand that this is important when they don't have oceans and coasts or tides, but they have to be educated in some ways about the tremendous potential in our coastal communities.
Yeah, absolutely, and really appreciate your effortless or tireless work to kind of echo that sentiment. Even folks who aren't on the coasts, they still have currents through all of the rivers. They still have opportunities to take advantage of the technologies, and I don't think it's yet widely enough recognized that wind, solar, and batteries alone aren't going to be sufficient to address the climate crisis. The sun goes down almost every night. We're
Right.
going to need,
Let's
other
hope.
resources
Right.
to balance it. So,
Right.
Congresswoman,
And sometimes the wind doesn't blow, but
that's
the
right.
winds
And
are always
sometimes it doesn't blow for days in a row. So
right.
you need those alternatives and
there's a
the
lot of work being
capacity.
done on storage, and that's important. But marine energy is really going to be a tremendous addition to what we need to make this important transition.
Absolutely. And the diversity of resources is what's so critical.
Exactly.
We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Greatly appreciate you joining us to celebrate World Oceans Day, and look forward to working with you as we continue to try to accelerate the commercialization of marine energy in Congress.
Likewise, and a happy World Oceans Day to you as well.
Thank you. And now we're going to hear from Troy Rushton, Canadian Minister of Natural Resources for Nova Scotia.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Minister Rushton. We're just really thrilled to get your unique perspective on this topic as Minister of Natural Resources and Renewables for Nova Scotia. So, as we're celebrating Oceans Day today, we really wanted to recognize how energy from our oceans can play an important role in building a sustainable future. So, Nova Scotia is really well known as being a leading jurisdiction globally in tidal energy. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about just how tidal energy development is contributing to both a blue economy and also action on climate change in the province.
Well, first off, thank you very much for having me here today. It's fantastic to be included in this, and there's great changes taking place in Nova Scotia within our climate change and within the tidal energy development. And Nova Scotia is a national leader in fighting climate change, and we've developed some of the most aggressive targets in the country, including 80% of our electricity from renewables has to be on the grid by 2030. And to achieve that, we're looking at a mix of solutions, including tidal energy. And as we establish those changes and the energy sector here in Nova Scotia, responsible development has been something that we fostered for a few years now. And renewable energy would not be green and sustainable unless we take these responsible approaches. So, in one hand, we need clean sources of energy for a sustainable future, and on the other hand, we need to ensure that these clean sources do not conflict with other equally important interests. And if we can harness things such as the Bay of Fundy, which sees 160 billion tons of water flow through each tide through this body of water, recognizing worldwide that this is a significant resource. If we can harness that, we can do it anywhere that the tide comes in and out on a daily basis. And as we do this work, we're developing expertise and opportunities to export it around the world, and thereby contributing to the blue economy.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, many of our members are involved in just some of the early projects in the Bay of Fundy, and are also now finding opportunities internationally because of that. So in light of that, I'm just wondering what your views are on what some of the of Nova Scotia's greatest achievements are in marine renewable energy to date. I mean, you've touched on that, but I wonder if you can elaborate a bit.
Well, it's a balanced approach with the environmental sector, social and economic interests that lead to a responsible development of our marine renewables. And as we've gone forward, we've created a clear regulatory path and process to get from the testing point to commercial development. And our marine renewable energy strategy maps out a high level plan to continue researching and developing, and eventually have these resources come to the grid and provide electricity to Nova Scotians on a daily basis. And all of this also aims to protection of our marine environment as well, and respect the community needs at a local level, and the economic impact that we can have, and we can have a healthy ocean environment and renewable energies coming from a tidal source. And I just want to highlight the fact that just not too long ago, we actually had a project in the water, sustainable marine Energy developed delivered the first power from its platform in Grand Passage to Nova Scotia's electricity grid not too long ago. So it's projects such as this that I get excited about, and I have an electrical background prior to politics, and this is something that I've been following for quite a few years, and it's just it's exciting and amazing to be a part of that at the government level, where I'm actually going to see some positive change to utilize tidal energy.
Yeah, I think so. And we'll be hearing more about sustainable marine in a bit as well. So, I mean, I think that's very exciting. And the other point that you brought up, the regulatory framework, I mean, one of the things that we're really focused on is the fact that Nova Scotia has the only regulatory framework specifically for marine renewables in all of Canada. So I call that, quite an achievement. One thing, I'd like to pick your brain about a bit, just because we are so focused on energy transition, how we're going to get more renewables on the grid. And one thing that comes up quite a bit is the fact that marine renewable energy, it isn't as mature yet as other renewable sources like solar or wind energy. And obviously the hope and the aim is that costs come down. And I'm just wondering, from the experience Nova Scotia has gained to date in developing tidal energy, what are your thoughts on some of the critical next steps needed to further commercialize the sector and the technology?
Well, a couple key points. I think we do have to be patient, but we also have to strive for the goal at the end of the tunnel, if you will. It's important that this work reflect the science and the input from the subject matter experts and the marine users. It's important for us to enable early deployments that help us better understand the interactions between the tidal devices and the environment. And it's important for us to learn and to maintain habitat integrity for the health of our oceans. We certainly believe that by doing the right thing, we'll have the right objectives and goals at hand. And we must accept the fact we don't know what we don't know, and we will get it right. But it is going to take some time, and we're not necessarily going to get it on the first try. But we do have some good legislative guidances, good governance here in the province of Nova Scotia, and we have a fantastic space right here in the Bay of Fundy that will allow us to achieve this and learn and eventually utilize and share the information that we've learned worldwide, so we can capture this. The experience all over the world, and it's by working together on our marine renewables and other clean energy solutions that we're going to continue to be leaders in fighting climate change here in Nova Scotia, and really champion something that we set out to do as a province and government at hand.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point that we're learning by doing. So these are still for the most part pre-commercial technologies, and we're going to get some things right, and then some things aren't going to go as well, but we are learning as we do it. So that actually brings us to our close. So I just want to thank you very much for your time. We know you have a very busy schedule, but thank you for being here with us on World Oceans Day.
Well, I want to thank you very much, and it's a great honor to be here and celebrate this day and share a little bit of the good news of what we're doing here in Nova Scotia. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Those are some great conversations, and it reminds me just how important it is that our elected officials appreciate the value of marine energy. Most of the technologies out there, whether conventional or renewable, got started through support from governments, and marine energy is no different. We're going to need that support and growing recognition. So we're now ready to shift gears to our first panel, which is going to focus on the future of marine energy and what the industry experts are seeing around the corner. So we're joined today by Elaine Buck, the Technology Manager of Marine Energy for the U.S. Department of Energy's Water Power Technology Office. She's responsible for systems design and validation portfolio of projects, which involve the development and commercialization of marine energy technologies. She previously served as technical manager at the European Marine Energy Center and provided extensive experience in the testing and validation of wave and tidal energy technologies. Also joining us today is Lindsay Bennett, Operations Director of the Fundy Oceans Research Center for Energy, FORCE. FORCE is Canada's leading facility for tidal stream energy research, created to create a better understanding of how this technology can play a role in Canada's clean energy future. So Elaine, let me let me start with you. Last year, the National Renewable Energy Lab in the US issued a report that identified the potential of marine energy resources, finding a total technical resource potential in the 50 states of 2,300 terawatt hours, or enough to power 220 million homes. What do you view as marine energy's potential to help meet the US clean energy goals?
Thank you, Malcolm. Really, really great to be here. And thank you for that question. Certainly the NREL report is a great place to start to fully understand the marine energy potential. You can access the report for those out there. Just Google NREL and the marine energy resource, and it should come right up, and you can get a lot more detail about the potential in and around the United States. But I do want to quantify what you mentioned about the powering 220 million homes. That is just if we capture 1/10 of the technically available marine energy resource across the 50 states, just 1/10. So if you assume we're going to be obviously capturing a lot more than 1/10, we are looking at between 40 to 90 gigawatts of marine energy projects in the water. And I also wanted to mention that the Water Power Technology Office just released this year our multi-year plan. And in that plan, we have targeted for our marine energy program, and this will help to deliver towards the clean energy goals for the US. We're targeting 50 gigawatts by 2050. And I know you had mentioned earlier that there's some other targets out there. We are trying very hard to get more megawatts on the tidal side out in the water. Wave, we know, is going to have a little bit more time, but I'm so excited and so pleased to hear the certainly Representative Bonamici and her support of our industry. That's just fantastic.
It's really amazing just to hear, what the potential is in the U.S. because we have so many similarities in Canada as well in terms of just untapped potential. So it's just great to hear the focus that you have on it right now. But let's, also think about what's happening on the Canadian side of things. So I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay and ask, what do you view as marine energy's potential to meet Canada's clean energy goals?
You may be muted.
I think you're on mute, Lindsay. Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Thanks, Elisa. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'll just start by thanking Marine Renewables Canada and National Hydropower Association for organizing this to celebrate World Oceans Day. It's great to be here. So marine energy's potential to meet clean energy goals. This is precisely the question that Foundation Research Center for Energy was created to answer, at least in part. As mentioned in the intro, FORCE is Canada's lead test facility for tidal stream energy technology, and we were designed to understand the role that tidal can play in our clean energy future. So our facility is located in the Bay of Fundy, which is home to the highest tides in the world. We have 14 billion tons of water moving at over 5 meters per second each tidal cycle. That is, of course, a lot of water, and it's moving very quickly. So it generates about 8,000 megawatts of kinetic energy. And from that number, we estimate we can extract 2,500 megawatts without significantly affecting the flow. So as you can see, it is a vast resource. We are Canada's single biggest tidal resource, but of course, anywhere that two coastlines pinch together, you have a resource there. Canada has an estimated 40 gigawatts of tidal energy potential. And when you add in wave and river, that climbs to 340 gigawatts. So enough energy to power every home in Canada 5 times over. So the opportunity includes both large-scale transmission projects here in Canada as well as small distributed community generation. Right now in Canada, about 250 remote communities rely on their own fossil fuel plants, and of them 170 are fueled by imported diesel. So there's a significant opportunity there at small scale. Canada is also now demonstrating river current technologies that offer remote communities a solution that can be cost competitive, create jobs, and avoid emissions. So, lots of questions still remain, as other speakers have already said today. What technologies make the most sense? Can they compete with wind and solar? And of course, anytime you're in the water, you're spending, a fair bit of money in development. But as we know, water is 800 times more dense than air and runs predictably. So in terms of technology evolution, we're still where wind was decades ago. But the power of the resource remains undeniable, and we believe that spells a really great opportunity for Canada.
Yeah, so that potential, obviously, or the resource potential is definitely the starting point for attracting investment and interest from communities, governments, and whatnot. But I'm wondering now if you can talk a little bit about how FORCE is moving commercialization of marine energy forward, and just talk a bit about some of the initiatives that FORCE is currently working on.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. So FORCE is a test center. We're not a technology developer. We have two main roles, though, and both of them aimed at moving the sector forward. So we are a host to technology, and we do a lot to lower the cost of entry for new devices and remove some barriers. So we've built the onshore and offshore infrastructure so project developers can come and plug into one of our 34.5 kV subsea power cables, send their electrons to our onshore substation, and from there to the provincial power grid. We've also secured the provincial and federal environmental approvals for devices to test at our site. And we've collected the, quite frankly, hard-won data to characterize the site so that technology developers know the loads they have to design their devices for. As you can imagine, I mentioned what the flow rate is in response to your previous question. Collecting data from a resource that is energetically equivalent to a Class 4 hurricane is incredibly challenging. Our first sensors blew away, as did our first tidal device many years ago. It experienced loads 2.5 times higher than it was designed for, and 2 weeks after it was deployed, the blades blew out. The original estimates for Minas Passage were 300 megawatts of resource, and we now know it's close to 8,000. So at the start of this, many of us learned that the hard way. So resource data is a big part of what we do. We collect it live via subsea sensor platforms, radar, and through our operational experience on the water. But our second role is as a steward to the site, and this role is really critical, and it speaks to Minister Rushton's comments about the need for responsible development. People, residents, scientists, regulators, Indigenous communities, and the public, they want to know that any effects this technology may have on the environment are known and are acceptable. So the majority of our staff at FORCE are focused on science now at this point: marine biology, hydroacoustics, physical oceanography, and we monitor fish, marine mammals, lobsters, seabirds, and marine sound, and report all of our findings to the public as well as regulators. And increasingly, we're also partnering with many of these stakeholders to conduct the research and monitoring. And one example is a fish tagging program we're conducting in order to build the first biological atlas of the Bay of Fundy as part of a research program to reduce uncertainty about the potential marine life impacts. And so I'd really like to leave you with that example, because tidal energy can't commercialize without the social and regulatory license to do so. And so we are collecting the data in the most transparent way that we can, with a view to maintain and even grow social license for tidal.
Yeah, Lindsay, I would agree with you. I think that's a really key point, and it's been really great to see how much FORCE has evolved with what the industry's needs are too to get to that point. And so, I'll also turn it over to Elaine and pose that same question. How is Department of Energy moving the bar for the U.S. industry, and what initiatives are you taking on to advance the sector?
Great question. And I would probably fill up a whole hour just talking about our many initiatives. But I think that sort of the key needs for our U.S. marine energy program is we need access to infrastructure to get wave and tidal, out of the lab and into the water. And we also need to address certainly the pressing needs in other maritime economy markets, such as what Lindsay had talked about around coastal communities and other markets like aquaculture, or what we call powering the blue economy. So it's moving sort of, what can we do between now until we reach the grid stage? So there are two programs that come to mind that I'll talk about. One is TEAMR, and the other one is PBE, or Powering the Blue Economy. So the Powering the Blue Economy program is dedicated to furthering wave and tidal generation technologies at smaller scale, so at kilowatt scale, to target some of those existing markets that I just discussed. So aquaculture, offshore fisheries, and other big initiatives like powering ocean observing sensors. We need to collect a lot more data about our oceans. And so doing that is being able to instrument the ocean, as you will, but we've got to be able to have some reliable power. You can't just do that with batteries. So using wave, for example, to power ocean observing is a big project. And this also includes being able to provide power for autonomous underwater vehicles. That's a big area of interest with NOAA. So the PBE model also directs funding for the coastal communities for like disaster relief. So when we have a hurricane that comes through, and we know that these communities need fresh water, we've been sitting there, we've been testing at smaller scale devices through a program which was called the Waves to Water. And that was smaller devices that were being able to generate fresh water. And that was a huge program that is just starting to wrap up. And we had a lot of lessons learned across that project as well. I think the other project around TEAMR is where we're providing access to a network of our onshore lab facilities, and in the future further into our offshore facilities. So the developers can actually apply to TEAMR, and they can propose a facility that they actually need to do testing at. And then TEAMR actually will fund that facility directly. And this is a really great way to remove the burden to one of the barriers to testing, which is a cost-effective access to this wonderful network that the United States has of university and research lab facilities and experts. And as I said, this is going from, being able to access that network onshore, and we're starting to add now more of the offshore facilities as well. And I think two of them that, certainly the one that Senator Bonamici is very interested in is the Packwave site, and that's currently under construction. And we're really looking forward to having that online real soon.
Thanks much for that kind of overview. And I'm really glad you mentioned the Waves to Water project. I did have the opportunity to go down to Jeanette's Pier and see that deployment. And it's a great example of how marine energy can solve gaps that the clean energy economy otherwise isn't going to be able to have. Being able to deploy technology in emergency situations to provide power and potable water is amazing. And you're not going to get that from a solar panel or a wind turbine. So a lot of kind of shows the diversity and the variety and the need for marine energy technologies. So let me shift gears a little bit, because there has been a flurry of activity within North America over the last year or so, and I wanted to give you both of you the opportunity to share a couple of the key developments that you're seeing and excited by. So I don't know, Lindsay, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, that's great. So activity in the Bay of Fundy has increased significantly this past year, which is really very exciting. Some examples: Sustainable Marine announced the completion and launch of its 420 kilowatt floating tidal energy platform in Nova Scotia. And just last month, they announced they had successfully delivered power to the grid. I'll leave it there and let Jason tell you more about their project in the next panel, of course. Big Moon Power, another developer and birth holder here at the Force Tidal Energy Center, announced assembly of its first device at a metal fabrication facility here in Nova Scotia. This is one of an intended 18 devices planned for Force, each generating roughly 500 kilowatts of electricity, so enough to power 500 homes. Another one of our birth holders, DP Energy, has deployed a monitoring platform at Force to demonstrate equipment functionality at their birth site. Another tidal proponent here in Nova Scotia, Nova Innovation, began construction of its 1.5 megawatt project in Petit Passage, Nova Scotia. So not at the Force site, but in another permitted location. And for us at Force, as I mentioned, the key focus has been working with various stakeholders on a project to build the largest fish data set ever collected in the Bay of Fundy as part of a research program to reduce uncertainty about potential marine life impacts, and also working closely with technology developers and berth holders at Force to help in any way that we can design monitoring programs for their projects.
Elaine, what's your thoughts?
Oh, I've got lots of thoughts. I'm not going to be able to cover all the different programmatic areas because my area of interest, as you know, is the system design and validation, and that's all about getting metal wet. So I'll first talk a little bit. I'll just reverse it and talk more about our wave activities. So as you know, we are under construction with the PAC wave, which is going to be the largest wave test site in the world, offshore Oregon. The test site will be fully grid connected. They'll be with the capability of testing up to 20 devices for a maximum power output of 20 megawatts to the Oregon grid. Very excited about that project. We expect the first wave developers at PAC Wave to install in 2023, 2024. But we are currently waiting. Some of those developers are on the way to Oregon, are actually testing at the Navy site in Hawaii. And that is with Oscilla Power and Sea Power. These developers have been in development of wave technology, their wave technology devices over the last 10 years and have had steady progress. So we're really excited to see them get in the water at WETS, and then they'll start to scale up for the Oregon site. We also, as I talked about and touched on, had successful competitive prize with the Waves to Water initiative. And this followed the development of wave energy converters capable of generating that power to produce the clean water from the salt water. This is a huge opportunity for coastal communities, as we discussed and mentioned, because it's just so vitally important, especially as we are starting to see an increase in the strength of hurricanes and tornadoes, even. I mean, as they start to pass through coastal communities. So really, we look forward to seeing further success from the wave energy developers addressing these markets. There is also plans in place where we're working across the marine energy team to appropriately fund the NC deployments. We continue to shorten these learning curves that are necessary for installation, operations, maintenance, all the way through to recovery, including a focus on lowering the costs, especially on the OPEX side. Which we know is vital to make wave and tidal cost competitive alongside any of the other renewable energy sources like solar or offshore wind. On the tidal side, I know that we've got Stuart Davies, who's the CEO of ORPC. He's going to be talking in the second panel, so I do not want to take away from what he's going to be talking about, but they've had successful deployments up in Alaska. A developer that I worked closely with in my previous role at the European Marine Energy Center was Verdant Power, where they had deployed a three-bladed turbine on an innovative tri-frame setup in the East River off of New York City. And we were involved in the performance test of that device. It was very successfully installed, recovered, and installed again. So they were able to demonstrate sort of the efficiencies in their operations, installation and operations and maintenance plans. I think they set the record, if I'm not mistaken, of over 100 megawatt hours during the first 80 plus days of their testing, which is significant. And the turbines during the period of test performed over 98% of availability. So continuous operations and power generation during the ebb and spring tidal flows, which is a huge success. So there are many more, that I could talk about that are in the pipeline, but we're really starting to ramp up with more NC deployments, certainly in the next 5 years.
Thank you both. I haven't been in the marine energy space for very long, but it does seem like something is changing. We're getting from the lab, we're getting a lot more actual deployments in the water. It's very exciting. So unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there because of time. But I want to thank you both for taking the time to be with us today. Happy World Oceans Day. Based on this portion of the conversation, I'd say the future of marine energy is very promising, and we thank you for all of your efforts. And for everyone else, please stay tuned, because next up we're going to hear from several marine energy developers.
Thank you so much, Malcolm.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
All right. For our final panel of the day, we're going to hear from two marine energy developers that are leading the charge to commercialization. So joining us is Jason Heyman, who is the CEO of Sustainable Marine, which he founded in 2012. And he is a qualified naval architect who now leads a growing team located in Germany, Scotland, and Nova Scotia that is delivering the world's first floating tidal array at force. And we're going to hear more about that. And then we also have Stuart Davies, CEO of ORPC, joining us. And he brings nearly 2 decades of experience to ORPC as Chief Investment Officer and Portfolio Manager in the financial services industry, during which he served on the boards of dozens of companies in the energy industry. So I know both of you and your companies, but I think it's important for the audience to hear a bit about the background. So that's where we'll start. And so I'm wondering if each of you can please provide a quick background on both of your technologies, and we'll start with Jason.
Okay, thanks, Elisa, and great to be here. So I suppose we started about 10 years ago now, and we've come a long way since we were first pushing turbines around off the bow of a tug in Rotterdam, testing things, and had our first little platforms in the flume of different air. And to now where we've actually got our first electrons onto the grid here in Grand Passage. So we've been out here in Nova Scotia testing our floating plate eye platform, which you can see here on the wall behind me, our trimaran platform. And we brought our first prototype out here in 2018 after we did some testing in Scotland for about a year. And we've been testing in a non-grid connected capacity for a couple of years down in Grand Passage. And then recently we finished the construction of our substation and laid our subsea cable and hooked it up to the grid. And now, as we speak, actually right now, electrons are flowing onto Nova Scotia's grid from the platform right there in Grand Passage. So it's been quite a journey, and very excited to be where we are now.
Yeah, a lot of progress just in this past year. So, I mean, that is great to see. So over to you, Stuart.
Thanks, and thanks for having me on. So ORPC was founded in 2004. We're based in Portland, Maine. We have offices in Montreal, Canada, as well as in Dublin, and people on the ground in Anchorage, Alaska. We generate baseload, highly predictable renewable energy from free-flowing rivers and tides. Our device is pretty simple in design. As you can see behind me, we have one moving part. So you release the brake, it rotates the turbine and generates electricity. Our current deployment is in Igiugig, Alaska. It's entering its 4th year of operation.
That's amazing. And one of the things I'm thinking about as I'm hearing your backgrounds, the comment I made to Representative Bonamici about how wind, solar, and batteries are great, but they're not going to be sufficient to provide reliable 24/7 power everywhere. So it seems to me like a number of these technologies, like the project in Igiugig, they really can provide reliable power in and fill the gaps in that clean energy grid. So I wonder if you could each tell me a little bit more about the potential applications of your technologies. Are they complementing the traditional grid, or are they serving niches and needs that are otherwise largely unmet? What's your sense?
You want me to take this first?
Why don't you take it first, Stuart?
Yeah, sure. So, Igiagig, I think, is an example of an important use case globally. So it's a remote community, has its own grid, that is powered by diesel generation. It's about 700 million people worldwide who use diesel generators for electricity, another billion people who don't have any access to electricity at all. If you think specifically to Canada and Alaska, there's about 350,000 people who live in remote communities, and that's not picking up rural areas. So we think there's a huge opportunity to provide our devices to those communities. And again, if you look at our project in Igiagig, it's our 4th year of operation. We're going to complete the project later this summer. We're installing 2 of our RIV gens, a smart microgrid controller, and a battery storage that actually will form the grid, move their diesel generators to backup. And so those diesel generators will be off 60 to 90% of the time. They can go back and add wind and solar to get to 100% or another one of our devices. But again, I think the benefit that you touched on earlier, the two of you touched on earlier in your earlier interviews and panels, is the fact that it's so high, that tidal energy and river energy is so predictable, it can be that base load and be grid forming.
You're nodding approvingly, Jason. You have a similar
Yeah,
story?
absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more in terms of the base load potential for tidal. It's absolutely predictable. It's there on every turn of the tide, and what we see is that it really can provide that heartbeat, if you like, of energy that these communities require. Absolutely, wind and solar make an incredibly valuable contribution, but renewable energy is all about using the resources that you have in your backyard in a smart, intelligent way. And if you're lucky enough to have tidal energy in your backyard, then you have an amazing resource. You have something that's predictable, and it's just gold. It's never going away. You're never going to dig it up and use all of it. You're never going to tap it all out of the ground. It's going to be there for centuries and centuries to come.
And I think both of you have touched on what the key benefits are of tidal energy. And in the last panel, we talked a lot about just overall what is marine energy's potential. So I'm wondering, Jason, you knowing the Canadian perspective, if you can provide some insight on what is the potential for Canada? Why are we looking at it there? How can it help us reach our goals? Sure.
Yeah, well, I suppose, Canada having the longest coastline in the world helps. So it's an immense country with an immense potential. And I think marine energy really has, tidal and marine energy in general, has the potential to help Canada power up its efforts to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. It's something that I think is widely acknowledged that Canada needs to ramp those efforts up relative to its counterparts in the G7. And I think marine energy can help do that in a big way. And it can help do it in several contexts. So you have the remote communities and island communities sort of market. Certainly displacing diesel is a great early adopter market, and I think can be, the marine energy can really help those communities have a reliable power source. But not only that, you've also got communities, a little bit like where we are in Grand Passage, where they're at the end of the line. So they don't always have the most reliable connection. And so you can really help stabilize those grids, and you can actually reduce the cost of providing that energy to those communities that are at the end of the line. And they can have their own security of supply, I suppose. So they're not influenced so much by what's happening further upstream. And then there's another market, which is, I suppose, what Lindsay was talking about, which is phenomenal resources in the Bay of Fundy, which is literally gigawatt scale. And that could, of course, easily displace Nova Scotia's largest coal station, which unfortunately is still quite reliant on at this stage. And we know that to meet the targets that Minister Rushton was talking about, we need to get that off the grid, and we need to replace it with renewable energy. So I think tidal's sitting there as a great candidate to do that. And then any energy that isn't taken by the grid could, of course, be converted to hydrogen and pumped down the gas network into the Northeast US, largest energy market in the world, 200 miles down the road. So there's so many market opportunities here in Canada that you can really tap into and feed into with marine energy.
So Stuart, let me ask you the same question. What do you see as the marine energy potential, both in the United States as well as in Canada?
Sure. So I think, as Lindsay mentioned, in addition to the 40 gigawatts that's in the Bay of Fundy, there's 340 gigawatts when you think about rivers and dams and canals and tail races. And so I think that's an opportunity for our RivGen power system. But we also in the fourth quarter this year we'll be deploying our next generation tidal device. And so if you look at the U.S. And I think right now we have active projects in every province and territory of Canada except for Alberta. On the U.S. side, Cook Inlet is the U.S.'s Bay of Fundy. So I think according to NREL, there's about 40 gigawatts of potential there. If you look at the demand, there's only about a gigawatt of demand. So again, as you think about electrofuels, whether that's green hydrogen or ammonia, along the Aleutian Island chain, there's also tidal resources. So there's a real potential there. I actually spoke on a panel about this in Alaska a couple of weeks ago. There's a huge opportunity to develop that to be a green hydrogen hub in and around Anchorage or the Aleutians. On the lower 48, you have rivers like the Mississippi, the Missouri, the St. Lawrence that borders both Canada and the U.S. I think there's a real opportunity to generate baseload electricity there. And then as you think about on the U.S. side, the rollout of the EV charging networks, the challenge with wind and solar is, how do you have electricity of some of these fast chargers are 240 kilowatts of electricity. When Jason was talking about end of the line locations. If you think about a lot of rural UK locations, the idea of building a whole nother grid, to support EV charging, I believe our technologies, our industry's technologies, and our RPC's technologies can play a role in providing power to those EV charging networks.
Sometimes when we have these kinds of discussions and we're talking about benefits and the potential, it's kind of hard to see, why things aren't moving more quickly when you see how big the opportunity is. And I think that comes up a lot. And so, my question next is really around what are the challenges? Because obviously we have quite a few of them. And I just am curious from your perspectives, what challenges are you in particular facing? And then also what do you see within the broader industry? So I'll turn it over to you, Jason, to start.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose, one thing we've got to say is that, it takes time to develop new technologies. There's no shortcut. I think people these days sort of imagine that you render something up on the screen and you push go and it comes out the maker's lab and you can go and just put it in the water. We're working in very highly energetic environments that, as was mentioned earlier, are pretty brutal. So you need to get time on the water. You need to go through a few iterations, and you need to do that on water learning. But what we need to make sure is that, I suppose, that those who are taking that risk and who are putting their capital at risk to do that have a clear pathway. And I think that's part of the challenge is that it's quite often, Nova Scotia, as you mentioned, earlier with Mr. Russian, has a great regulatory framework, but Canada doesn't have a regulatory framework that enables this. And I think that, you need alignment there between, the federal and the provincial regulators to say, right, if you're going to come and you're going to go and try and do this in different environments, what's that going to take? And that needs to be proportional to what you're doing. So if you're going and doing a small scale demonstration project, maybe the regulatory hurdles are here. If you're going and putting in a demonstration project, maybe that's less than 10 megawatts, here. Okay, if you're going and putting a gigawatt, commercial project in, okay, fine, you got to run the full gamut. But the costs and the effort required to get these projects in the water, to do that initial testing, to do these initial demonstrations, need to be proportionate, so that you can walk and have that staged approach that's going to get you to your goal. Because if you don't have that, and if investors can't see that staircase is there, then it's going to be very, very hard to attract the capital that's required into quite a capital intensive and high risk endeavor.
So Jason, that's a really good point, and I'll share my frustration. I've had some of those similar conversations with some of the environmental groups in the United States, and they're not there yet. They're not comfortable with the sense that smaller projects don't need the full-blown kind of review of a gigawatt scale project. And I think there's a lot more education that needs to happen to get not only the environmental groups, but policymakers in the larger energy ecosystem to recognize the value and the opportunity that we provide. So Stuart, let me, in the interest of time, this may be one of our last questions. Let me ask you essentially the same thought, is what's needed to achieve our full-scale commercialization goals? What could what policies are needed or investment incentives are needed if we really want to get gigawatt scale deployment?
Yeah, and I'll just pick up on what you just mentioned. I really see two things. One is on the policy and regulatory framework. Our devices are not hydroelectric dams. They're not going to be there for 30 to 50 years. They can be put into the water and taken out. So to me, we need to come up with some sort of, short term, whether it's, 6 months or 1 year, where you can get a permit fairly quickly, agree up front on what the monitoring is going to be, put the device in, see how the marine life and marine mammals interact with the device when it's not turned on, then turn it on, measure what the impact is. If people are concerned about things, our devices, you can turn them off. They don't impede fish passage in any way. We've been able to demonstrate that over the last 15 years. If you look in Iggy last year, we had Alaska Fish and Game on site. We had the community having drones in the air and people in boats along with ORPC personnel. We actually had cameras on our device and had the University of Alaska Fairbanks monitoring using a special software to pick up images as they came through the cameras. We had over 4.5 million adult sockeye salmon and 40 million smolts pass by our device with no recorded fish injuries or fish mortalities. That's the kind of history we need to build in the organization, but we also can't go back to square one at every new site. I mean, we have to be able to build off this history and move forward. The second thing on the policy front, and I think Elaine touched on this a little bit in her comments, but I think there needs to be the shift in research dollars towards, Jason picked up on this theme. You learn a lot by putting devices in the water. So if you look at, the first time we put a RibGen in Iggy, I think it was 8 or 10 ORPC personnel there, and it took 4 weeks. The second time we deployed, it was 2 weeks with 2 people. So you're just going to get more efficient on every front as you deploy more devices. We've made significant, small changes to the design of the RibGen, which to the untrained eye you wouldn't see the difference, but they've taken down costs and they've really reduced operating and maintenance costs. And so it's that type of experience you can't get in the lab. And so I believe there's got to be a bucket for policymakers where they really focus on commercialized or near commercialized technology, so we can get those devices in the water. We can address the environmental policy issues. We can show to the communities that think it's all about solar, wind, and battery storage that there's another alternative out there that can be a base load that can be paired with those technologies and really accelerate the adoption of renewables.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And the disconnect between the realities of the climate crisis and how we build infrastructure in North America, both the United States and Canada, they don't line up. And to the extent you believe there's a climate crisis, we need to rethink how we do infrastructure, particularly clean energy infrastructure, differently, and putting marine energy in the same buckets as technologies that are going to be there for generations. It doesn't make any sense. So Stuart and Jason, we are out of time, but thank you both for joining us today. Really appreciate you shedding light on some of the challenges and triumphs that you face as developers. So in addition to being innovators, I hope you're inspiring the next generation of developers. So thank you both for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Happy World Ocean Day.
Absolutely. And a special thank you to everyone who joined us today. Happy that you were able to celebrate World Oceans Day with us, and I hope you found this webinar informative. Alyssa, any last comments on your end?
No, well, I would just like to say thanks, for collaborating with us on this. I think it was just such a great topic and idea to have something like this on World Oceans Day. So thank you and your team.
Absolutely, and pleasure to partner with you. And it really is a North American market. I think that's how the industry views it. So to the extent that we can help provide value to as many people as possible and do more of these collaborations, happy to do it. So thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks for the team, for Kelly and Leroy and others behind the scenes and my team to help putting this together. And Luci Chiachi, I cannot forget her. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.